Time flows languidly in Voroshilovsk. I remember Sochi, where I spent whole days in the parks. Here, the doors of the hospital are closed. Winter is in full swing. During bandaging, accidentally heard a conversation about the deteriorating health of Captain Nikolayenko. Is it really the commander? I thought anxiously. The sister found out the number of the room. Eltunin? And you are here. Surprised, Nikolayenko waved his hands when I appeared before him. I didn't expect that. I thought you were in command of a battalion. Well, how are things in the regiment? Have you been there long? Cheddar, following you, Uzi. I grinned. I didn't have time to take command. After hearing the story of how the company tried to cut the highway in the old Crimea, Nikolayenko sighed heavily. The Krauts managed to pull up fresh forces. We eagerly began to analyze the results of the landing, tried to make predictions of further developments in the Crimea. Nikolayenko, having borrowed a map from someone, drew a happy picture of how our troops from Akhmenai positions would strike a decisive blow to the fascist group and clear the Crimea. However, the days passed, and the radio and newspapers did not report on the transition of troops on the offensive from Akhmenai positions. Nikolayenko saying goodbye to me before evacuation to the rear hospital. And yet our landing operation will enter the annals of the war and will be one of its glorious pages. After all, there was a new front. I often write home from the hospital. Letters in reply are not happy. I still haven't heard from my father. Meanwhile, my wounds healed, and in the second half of February 1942, the medical commission of the hospital discharged me into the ranks. In a sunny afternoon, I left the hospital, clutching in my hand a tiny package in which all my belongings were placed, a towel and a piece of soap. I stomped to the station to go to Armavir to the disposal of the personnel department of the military district. I reached Armavir by freight train. In the city, I paid attention to a lot of different agitprop posters. On the way to the headquarters, I looked at them with interest, and suddenly I froze in front of a huge black and green louse in a horned helmet, which is on the poster I read. The louse is Hitler's ally. It is a carrier of typhus. A helmet with the ominous swastika on the head of the ugly insect caused involuntary laughter. I did not think at that moment that this poster would stay in my memory for a long time. I didn't have to look for the personnel department. It was located in an old two-story building not far from the station. I was summoned for a conversation by a tall, ascetic-looking lieutenant colonel. He asked me about my relatives, inquired where I received my military education, how long I studied, who was the head of the school. Then suddenly, without any connection, as it seemed to me, he asked, "You know what a marching battalion is?" "I know the organization of rifle, separate and non-separate tank." "Finally, airborne battalion." Shrugging my shoulders, I replied, "But about the marching battalion we were not told anything in the school." "Marching battalions are created only for the period of marching to the active army. You are probably thinking, why am I telling you about it? I explain. You are appointed commander of a marching battalion which you must form by February 27th. You have less than a week at your disposal. Hurry up and leave for Voroshilovsk today. Take an extract from the order from Major Kolisov. He will also indicate where to get the documents necessary for the formation of the battalion. Any questions?" None. So it seemed that my hope to go to the front again began to come true. In the second half of the next day, the military commissar of Voroshilovsk presented me to the battalion commissar Vasiliyev, Chief of Staff, Senior Lieutenant Ulitin, and commanders of subdivisions. Next to Vasiliyev, I looked like an undergrowth. His appearance and rough manners Vasiliyev sharply distinguish him from all political workers with whom I have previously had to work. Chief of Staff Ulitin, glaring at me with dark eyes, asks if I realize the complexity of the task before. In 4 days to form a 1,500th marching battalion, his look frankly says, and how such a milkman was entrusted with such a responsible task. 2 days fly by without rest. During the day we are rushing around the city, placing the arrived people, completing the units, organizing meals, and at night we summarize the results of the past day and clarify the work plan for the next day. The number of people arriving at our disposal is overwhelming. I had the opportunity to lead into battle 150 fighters and commanders. In the marching battalion, the smallest company is 3 times more. Chief of Staff, when the number of battalion passed the 1400, grabbed his head and moaned, "Matters matter, and how are we going to get such an awful lot of men to the front?" "It's nothing. Your Litin will deliver them safe and sound, murmured Vasiliev, pacing the room. If we were to lead such a huge force into battle, I would doubt our abilities, but here it's all about organization and maintaining order. For us to have order, we have to keep it ourselves. Here you are, Comrade Lieutenant. The commissar turns to me, trying to speak deliberately sternly. You are pecking your nose, you will soon make a hole in the table, and you don't let yourself fall asleep. I propose to disperse now and sleep for 3 or 4 hours. Having agreed with the commissar's proposal, I'm going to lie down on 2 clerical desks put together, but the commissar strongly protests and calls me to the hotel, which is 300 meters away. We're placed in different rooms, where there is a free bunk for me. 3 officers snore like gods. Quietly, without lighting the light, I sneak to the place, undress, get under the sheet, and for the first time in the last 3 days I feel a soft bed under me. The noise made by the awakened neighbors wakes me up. It's 7 in the morning. I quickly dressed and headed for the barracks, where the marching units were stationed. Red Army soldiers and junior commanders are having breakfast. From the dining room, smells that cause cramps in the stomach. Nutrition, Red Army organized well. Food comes to the canteen regularly, and strict control over the preparation and distribution of food ensures that everyone receives the established norm. Red Army soldiers are satisfied. In the worst situation, were the commanders attached to the military canteen. Their breakfasts, lunches and dinners do not stand any comparison with the nutrition of subordinates. Dissatisfaction is caused not only by the poor quality of food, but also by the service. And yesterday many commanders were left without dinner because they were 5 to 10 minutes late. I'll teach you, comrades, to order, you, said the head of the canteen dryly and adamantly. Having learned about what had happened, Vasiliev rushed to the canteen. With his usual determination, he ordered to close all the doors until the commanders will not be fed. For exceeding his authority, the commissar, and in company with him and me, was demanded by the head of the garrison. In 40 minutes we must appear before the formidable eyes of the chief of the garrison. I say to Vasiliev at breakfast, "We'll have a bath, Ilya Sidorovich." "It's all right," grinned the commissar. "God won't give us away, and the pig won't eat us. I'm ready to suffer for a just cause. Bad is the political officer who looks indifferently at the ugly attitude to the fulfillment of duty." Exactly. At 10 we nervously walk around the spacious reception room of the head of the garrison. So much to do and have to lose time to deal with yesterday's incident. Finally, the adjutant invites us into the office. The elderly colonel, leaning back tiredly in his chair. "Why are you terrorizing the canteen workers? Who gave you the right to interfere in its work?" "Your question, Comrade Colonel, concerns only me," Vasiliev calmly bases. "It was me who interfered in the work of the canteen because half of the battalion commanders were left without dinner by the negligent head." "Really?" The colonel looks in surprise at the intendant, stretched out by the table. "You didn't report it to me." "The canteen's work schedule was approved by me, Comrade Colonel, and the commanders were late for dinner. Merely 5 to 10 minutes late," Vasiliev explained. "It doesn't matter how late, the main thing is that they were late," insisted the intendant. "Do you know how long commanders work?" Vasiliev asked, holding back his anger. "In 4 days they have to receive, clothe and equip house and feed 1,500 men. It's not easy for them to carve out time not only to eat, but also to sleep. And you're worried about the canteen schedule. You forget that it's wartime." "Why didn't you let the canteen workers go home for 2 hours?" interrupted Vasiliev. "Colonel, what was there to do?" The commissar shrugged his shoulders in surprise. "Commanders found the canteen workers in cheating and demanded an explanation from the manager. The commander's claims are justified. I asked the manager to go out into the hall, but she said through the waitress that she was in a hurry to go home. That's when I ordered to close all the exits from the canteen. That's the whole incident. Comrade Kerr, the head of the military store, instead of complaining, should have put his own house in order." "The Politruk is right," said the colonel reproachfully to the blushing intendant. "Put things in order before it's too late. And you," turns to Vasiliev, "I forbid you to interfere in the work of the canteen. If the work does not improve, report to me." "I can't," grumbles Vasiliev. "I'm leaving tomorrow with the train." "Are you ready to go?" "Come on, Lieutenant, report." After listening, he exclaimed, "You're terrorists, but good guys. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock I'll watch your battalion." Going outside, Vasiliev breathed in the cold air. Though it seems to have passed. and I confess I was afraid that I'd get the worst of it from the head of the garrison. If you want to get to the front safely, don't get involved in such stories. All right, I won't, grinned the commissar. The second half of the day and evening flashed by in troubles. In the evening, when all the questions were solved, and now, brothers, we can say goodbye to the city. I'd just like to get to my bunk, Ulitin complained, rubbing his lower back. The next day after the review and lunch, the battalion started loading. The commissar and I went to the station commandant to get the documents. After listening to his good wishes, I turned to leave. Suddenly I was staggered, as if drunk. If it weren't for Vasiliev's mighty arms, I would probably have fallen. My legs felt like cast iron. What's the matter with you, Commander? What happened? The commissar murmured sympathetically in his ear. Overcoming a sudden attack of dizziness, I resolutely stepped towards the exit, throwing on the Y. Overworked, it seems, without sleep. I'll sleep in the car, and everything will be all right. However, I reach the car with difficulty. I don't have enough strength to go up to the Teplushka. Vasiliev, noticing my indecisive stomping in front of the carriage, picks me up in his arms and, pushing me up, Mercy's the commander. Dozens of hands help me. Having flown into the Teplushka, I feel a new attack of weakness. I step to the bunks and fall on them without undressing. I mention this moment in my memory only separate episodes. As if in a dream I hear Vasiliev's murmuring bass. Commander, get up, have a hot meal. But I can't move a hand or a leg. Language does not obey. Mentally I reassure myself. Weakness is caused by sleepless nights. I'll sleep, then I'll eat. At some station I am gently lifted from the bunks and taken out of the Teplushka. Breathing in the cold air, I come to my senses. Look around with surprise and ashamed that I am supported under my arms like a decrepit old man. Make an attempt to free myself and walk independently, but immediately fall into the arms of my comrades, supported from both sides. I enter some stuffy room smelling of medicines. We are met by a thin old man with a wedge beard and a pince-nez. The old man stares at my face and remarks, worried. He's delirious, poor man. Undress him and let's have a look. The old man examines me for a long time, then sits down tiredly on a chair. What's wrong with him, doctor? Vasiliev's deafening bass fills the small room. The old man waved his hands guiltily. What kind of doctor am I to you? I'm just a paramedic. And he draws a conclusion that is irrefutable in its genius simplicity, and your comrade is sick. Even a fool can see that. Vasiliev gets angry. What is he ill with? He has a fever, probably a cold. I'll give you antipyretic medicine. 1 powder 3 times a day. Maybe it will go away by itself on the road. I am forced to open my mouth, and the old man pours the contents of the powder into it, pours water from a glass. Choking, I swallow it together with the medicine. Having taken the rest of the powders, Vasiliev carries me to the Teplushka and lays me on the bunk. Under the measured clatter of the wheels, I fell into oblivion again. I woke up in some long corridor on a stretcher. I do not know how long I have been lying here. A group of people in white coats stopped nearby. I hear a tired woman's voice. What's wrong with him? We don't know. They took him off the train today in an unconscious state. Mercy, take off his uniform and shirt. The woman bends over. I see her haggard face covered with a fine net of wrinkles. She scrutinizes my chest and suddenly turns pale. Quickly straightening up, she gives me a curt command. Immediately to the isolation ward. Rash. That was the last word I heard. Then I blacked out again. I've regained consciousness from a deafening rumble. Something fell on me from above. I opened my eyes wide and I see nothing. An alarming thought burns me. CDE. Gone blind. I lie as if in a cart, which bounces on the bumps. Next to me someone is wailing pitifully. Oh my God, what a misfortune. Suddenly my eyes brighten. I see the white smoothness of the ceiling, a matte lampshade hanging down. I shift my gaze to the left and notice a slender figure in a white coat trying to put a huge sheet of plywood against the wall. Apparently the plywood was covering the broken window, which now smells of cold, damp air. From somewhere far away comes an explosion. A girl of about 16 or 17 bends low over my bunk. I can see her frightened eyes. The girl shrieks with joy. Alive, Comrade Lieutenant. Alive? What happened? Where are we? The damned fascists are bombing the station again. The girl's huge blue eyes narrowed in anger. She corrected a dark strand that had escaped from under her kerchief. Don't be afraid, Comrade Lieutenant. Me. She calms down, but she herself is trembling like an aspen leaf. The bombs are falling nearby, but they don't hit the building. The sight of a fragile little girl trying to encourage a frontline soldier is so sweet that I can't hold back a smile. Well, if you're not afraid, sister, I won't be either. Where am I, anyway? At the hospital. It is located in the building of the former railroad school, not far from the station, the girl explains. The station is bombed almost every day, so we get some. What kind of station? Dashing. What's your name, sister? Marina. And me, Alexander Terentьевич. What happened to me, Marina? You have typhus. 12 days you didn't regain consciousness. I thought you'd never recover. Now thank God you're awake. The girl continues to chirp animatedly, and I fall back into oblivion. It happened several times. It is difficult to say how many days I was in such a state. Gradually my consciousness becomes clearer. I perceive the surrounding world more realistically, limited by the semi-dark room of the isolation ward. Once again I wake up from a strong chill. The blanket has slipped off and the room is cold. I want to reach for him, but I can't lift my arms. I want to scream, but a croak comes out of my throat. I sigh with relief when Marina appears. She wraps me up, then sits down next to me and tries to pour something hot into my mouth. I have no appetite at all, and the smell of food is repulsive. I glance guiltily at my sister and turn away. One day, desperate, Marina asks, "What would you like?" Feeling unbearable fever, imagined how at home in the July heat once drank cold sourdough. And sourdough. I'll get it, by God, I'll get it. Marina revives. 7 kilometers from here lives my friend. Her parents have a cow. I'll run. Wow, 7 kilometers. I'll be off in a flash. 1 foot here, the other there, assures Marina. At night I'll run away while everyone is asleep. When I come to myself again, on the windowsill I notice a glass jar filled with something white. Ran away after all. I marveled. 14 kilometers in the spring thaw. And suddenly I felt horrified that at the very thought of sour milk I felt nauseous. Marina came running into the room, radiant, cheerful, as if there was no sleepless night and 14 kilometers off-road. When she saw that I opened my eyes, she greeted me cheerfully. Good afternoon, Alexander Terentьевич. She grabs the jar, pours the sourdough into a mug and brings it to my lips, saying affectionately, "Here is the sourdough. You can eat." And suddenly noticing with what disgust I make the first sip, sorrowfully lowers his hands. Do not. I feel so sorry for Marina that I resolutely say, Come on, Marina, delicious plain sourdough." I quickly swallow and, exhausted, close my eyes, desperately fighting my stomach's attempts to spit the sourdough back out, and soon I lose consciousness again. One morning I woke up for the first time with an almost clear head, but covered in sweat. My shirt was wringing. Fortunately, Marina was sitting next to me. She puts a thermometer under my arm and immediately ran out of the room, turns with clean underwear. I change clothes and am glad that my hands already obey me a little. For the first time I feel hungry. Marina brings a mug of strong, sweet tea with cookies. The crisis has passed. I am transferred to the general ward. There are 12 beds, my neighbour, a small black-haired man with a hawkish nose, smiling. Welcome, Ketso. Bringing his face close to mine, he whispers in confidence. This bed just became available today. Your predecessor died. He was a good man. How are you settling in here, Alexander Terentьевич? Better than in the isolation ward. Marina's gentle voice sounds like the singing of a spring lark. Brighter and warmer, but not better, I say with a serious look. In the isolation ward between me and the bony witch with a scythe always stood vigilant you, Marina, and I was not afraid of her. But now I have nothing during the day, but at night she can take me by surprise. Well, now bony evil with you cannot cope. You, smiles Marina, you have become quite good. Bring me a mirror, Marina. I want to see how good I am. Okay, I will. Marina promised and stroked my hand affectionately. I first looked at Marina's face illuminated by the morning sunlight. I'm attracted to her surprisingly affectionate eyes. They seem like 2 small forest lakes, in which the blue sky is reflected. Marina vividly reminded me of my sister. I close my eyes and whisper affectionate. Marussia. What, Alexander Terentievich? Woke up Marina. Nothing. I am embarrassed. Remembered sister. Her name is Marussia. The next morning Marina appeared in the room with a clay jug in her hands. I brought you some milk, she said cheerfully, putting the jug on the bedside table. Drink, Alexander Terentievich, the milk is steaming. We milked the cow early today on purpose. So she ran 14 kilometers on the muddy spring road again. My heart fills with gratitude and pity at the same time. Making a sign for the girl to lean over, I whisper, I beg you, do not go for milk anymore. I don't like it since childhood. How so? Upset Marina, and the doctor said that milk is good for you as a medicine. But the doctor did not know that I was drugged with milk as a child. I have fulfilled your request. Marina remonstrates and holds out a small round mirror. Now you can see for yourself that the bony one has left you behind. Putting the mirror on the bedside table, she smiles affectionately and runs away, and I ask my neighbour Shalva to pour milk into mugs for all the inhabitants of the ward. That's great. Shalva gets up from his bunk, leaning over the jug, dreamily adds, it smells like home. Every day our ward becomes more lively, gradually improves appetite. I make my first attempt to get up. I slowly lower my legs to the floor and, holding onto the bunk, I straighten up. At that moment I must have looked like an infant on naughty legs for the first time, left to its own devices. After standing for a few minutes I felt dizzy, fell on the bunk and lay still for a long time. Then I decide to try again. I get up again and stand leaning on the bedside table. These my exercises do not go unnoticed. Shavar approvingly claps his hands, and those lying nearby smiled faintly. Remembering Marina's mirror, I take it, bring it to my face, and in fright lower my head. A skeleton with bulging cheekbones and sunken cheeks, with a mop of tangled blonde hair. I didn't realize that disease could disfigure a person like that. A poster depicting a typhoid louse in a horned Nazi helmet comes to mind. I whisper involuntarily, "What have you done to me, you fascist scum?" However, every day I feel more confident, already freely walking around the ward, talking to those who cannot yet get out of bed. For hours I sit near an elderly Red Army soldier, the father of 5 sons, whose picture is on his chest. When I first sat down near him, he handed me the photo card and proudly wheezed in a weak voice. These are my eaglets. In the 40s, with a whole family in the city filmed. I look at the photo with interest. Behind the seated man and woman stand 5 handsome guys, very different in age and appearance. Taking the photo card from me, the soldier said, pointing to the 3 guys on the right, "My eldest are already fighting. The firstborn is a tanker. These 2 are in the infantry. If you could help me write letters to them, my son, I'll send them home to my wife and she'll forward them to the boys." I agree willingly. Marina brought a clean school notebook, and I write 1 letter every day. Neither he nor I have enough strength for more. The letters are the same. They began like this. "Hello, my dear son Yakov. Your dear father Kuzma Petrovich is writing to you. In the first lines of my letter I inform you that I'm doing well. I am lying in the hospital. The doctors here are good. The care is good. I'm getting better little by little." Then followed an order to the sons not to disgrace the honor of their family so that it would not be a shame to return home, and therefore to beat the Nazis properly, but do not put your head in vain. The concluding letter was to his wife. "Hello, our dear wife, Pavlina Mefodievna." The old soldier's weak voice sounds strict and slightly solemn. "Your God-given husband, Kuzma Petrovich Veretiev, sends you a low bow. I inform you that I am still alive, but I almost gave my soul to God. To my remark that I should not scare my wife," the soldier said sternly. "Anything can happen. She must be ready for anything. Right? God only knows what will happen next. But you, our dear wife Pavlina Mefodievna, don't say a word about it to the boys. Send my letters to your elders, that's all. Let them fight in peace. And tell Fedunka and Antosha that Dad sends his regards. And my advice to you, save your household so that you don't come back to a broken trough. I know it will be difficult for you alone, but save Milka the cow and 5 sheep. Fedka and Antoshka are not small. They will help you. Chickens and other small animals can be raised quickly, but you can't get a cow like our Milka and pedigree sheep from scratch." The soldier dictated various household tips for a long time, and in conclusion blessed the younger sons and listed all the relatives and fellow villagers to whom he asked to convey a low bow. After such a tedious occupation, Kuzma Petrovich leaned back exhaustedly on his pillow. I too was tired and wanted to joke that one letter, they say, 2 soldiers had fallen off. But when I looked at Kuzma Petrovich, I bit my tongue. His face had turned grey. His forehead was covered with beads of sweat, and his breathing was interrupted. All day long Kuzma Petrovich lay immovable, with closed eyes, only occasionally moving his fingers, clutching the family photograph to his chest. He was twice taken away for some procedures, but they did not help him, apparently. Only once did he lift his eyelids when I asked him his home address. "We are from Saratov," he whispered and named a district and a village. Then he added dreamily, son, we have wonderful places. The forest is nearby, the river is clean and fishy. Come after the war. If I'm not here, my wife, Pavlina Mefodiyevna, and the boys will welcome you like a native when you tell them how we were miserable here together." Even such a short conversation tired the soldier. He closed his eyes again, and I returned to my bunk. When I woke up and wished good morning to everyone, I went to the far corner, as was my habit, to ask Kuzma Petrovich how he was feeling, but his bunk was empty. "Where is Kuzma Petrovich?" I asked in surprise. "Who knows him?" His Ukrainian neighbor shrugged his mighty shoulders. "The orderlies took him away, maybe for some kind of procedure." I thought, trying to push the frightening thought away, but immediately doubted. What kind of procedure at night? We saw no more of Kuzma Petrovich, whose simplicity and calmness had touched my heart. His bunk was occupied by a young junior lieutenant. He was slender and gentle like our Marina, and just as shy. When he saw Marina, he was embarrassed, tightly wrapped his robe, and discreetly spit on the palm of his hand, smoothed unruly blonde curl. He did not take off her surprised grey eyes, shaded by thick, long lashes. From then on, the junior lieutenant never left my side. He got a cane with a curved handle somewhere and carefully supported me as I walked first through the ward and then down the corridor. We got to know each other. The junior lieutenant called himself Volodya, and I said my name was Sasha. However, he never dared to call me by my first name, although he was only 2 years younger. Almost every day I visited Marina, and Volodya always accompanied me. On the 5th day of our acquaintance, he, dulling his eyes, timidly asked, "Comrade Lieutenant Marina, your fiancée?" "What makes you think so?" I was surprised. She, you could say, from the other side of the world brought me back, and I love her like a sister. For a bride, Marina is still small, I said with sincere conviction. Volodya's pale cheeks turned pink. He looked at me in surprise. "How small is she?" "Quite a grown-up girl. In Ukraine, they get married at 16. So get married." I laughed. "You say you're from Ukraine, but I'm a Siberian. We have different customs." Volodya became cheerful, and every time I was going to visit Marina, a long fancy in front of the round mirror left her on my nightstand. However, as I noticed, our joint courtesy visits did not give pleasure to Marina. She very unkindly answered Volodya, rejected all signs of his attention. Not wanting to upset myself, I no longer looked in the mirror. It seemed to me that it is worth to break out of the walls of the hospital, and I'll perk up. So after every examination by the doctor, an elderly and very cordial woman, I put my palms together pleadingly and, looking into her eyes, I asked, "Mary Stepanna, can I go to the commission?" "No and no, my friend," she answered. "It's too early." But in the 20th of April, before answering my traditional question, Mary Stepanovna hesitated. Once again she looked at me closely from head to toe and "Does not inspire, my friend, your appearance of hope for a positive decision of the medical commission." "No, I'll get better, Mary Stepanna." "In 3 days." She grinned. "That's a rot." "Well, let's try, if you want to will so much." Maria Stepanovna decisively waved her hand, clapping her strong palm on my bony back. The medical commission met on Thursdays. There were 3 days left to bring me, in the words of our glorious company Sen Instructor Sidor Petrenko, in a combat-ready state. I shared my hopes and doubts, first of all with Volodya and his neighbor Ivan Mikhailovich Sviridenko. "Yes, Clapper," scratches the back of his head good-natured Sviridenko. "You are still a loner, no. The healers will take no sin on their souls to let you out of the hospital." "And I propose to marinate Comrade Lieutenant a little," Volodya suddenly lights up. "What do you mean, Tamar, the lieutenant?" Sviridenko is surprised. Just like that, Volodya takes off my Panama, smooths my dishevelled, riotous hair. First we'll cut his hair under the box, then we'll shave him, and before the commission we'll rub his cheeks with red brick powder. Our girls sometimes did that when they gathered for a party. Why? C. Dilo Clapper Balalaika V.E. Good-naturedly chuckles Sviridenko. I wish I could feed you with lard. And my friends began to prepare me for the medical commission. Sviridenko forcefully feeds, naively hoping for 3 days to grow meat on my skeleton, in exchange for green onions, grown in cans he received in the canteen Dope Peak, brought it to me and did not leave until I swallowed the last spoonful of porridge or soup. Every day he would cut the green stalks off one of the onions and, giving them to me for lunch, would say, Sibulia, you're a good help. On Wednesday I was given a haircut by the whole ward. Volodya asked for scissors and, having sharpened them on a stone, tried to cut my hair under the box with the help of a comb. After a few minutes, it became clear to everyone that he is not a good barber, and Sviridenko, unable to stand it, snatched the scissors from him. In his performance, my head looked like the head of a Zaporozhian composing a letter to the Turkish Sultan. Fortunately, my comrades stopped the enthusiastic Ukrainian in time. Finally, the haircut was over. With curiosity, I look at myself in the mirror and come to astonishments. My hairstyle most of all resembled our ancestors' favourite haircut under the pot. Since everyone present was involved in putting my hair in order, there were no critical remarks. However, this was not the end of my misadventures. Restless Sviridenko long and carefully scraped off the youthful fluff from my cheeks, and about an hour before the commission Volodya brought a handful of red powder, which could paint the cheeks of all the young women of my native Stekloka. Fulfilling his promise, Volodya worked up a sweat and ground a brick fragment into the finest powder, but I resolutely resisted his attempts to tint my sunken, earthy cheeks. Trying to convince me of the necessity of the cosmetic operation, Volodya spat on his index finger and rubbed the brick dust on his cheeks, after which they turned crimson. His face looked so funny that we all laughed merrily. What's so funny? Volodya wondered. Everybody does that when they want to look better. It's the handsome Major Latushkin, panting with laughter. If you, Volodya, in this form will show up in front of Marina, she will immediately fall in love with you up to your ears. And Sviridenko advise. You, Clapper, be silent in front of the doctors, yes, inflate cheeks, and everything will be yak properly. An hour later, the doctors scrutinized my shrunken figure, and although I did not inflate my sunken cheeks, but tried to keep the chest wheel, I must have looked very funny. The members of the commission, looking at me, smiled. A quarter of an hour later, my wardmates warmly congratulated me on my recovery. The last 24 hours in the hospital seem especially long. Late in the evening, Marina, having given up duty, asked me to go out to the garden. Volodya, as usual, was going to accompany me, but Marina gave him such a look that he was embarrassed and, referring to some urgent matter, fell behind. We walked around the garden for a long time, not daring to start a conversation. I do not know what feelings my young nurse was feeling at that moment, but my heart was overflowing with boundless gratitude and brotherly tenderness. I wanted to hug Marina's fragile shoulders, to tell her a lot of tender and affectionate words, but youthful shyness fettered my tongue. I mumbled something about the weather, that here the grass is already green, and in my native land has not yet snowed, and we probably won't see each other again. Marina suddenly says sadly, "Why not see each other?" Suddenly I object to myself. As soon as the war is over, I will come to visit. Will you come? Marina perked up. Oh, try, Marina. I'll definitely try to see you when you grow up very big. You're all joking, and I'm not small. The girl took offense. The guard, who was closing the front doors, interrupted our conversation. Marina wished me good night, taking a promise that I will visit her tomorrow to say goodbye. The next day after breakfast I dressed. My outfit had become too spacious. The pants, which I was accustomed to wear without a belt, barely fit around my hips. Noticing my poor condition, Major Latushkin donated me a Caucasian belt with metal plate. Slowly and solemnly, I pass my comrades in misfortune, fervently wishing them a speedy recovery. In response, I hear good wishes, and I am more and more convinced that common misfortune brings people together. Volodya escorted me to the clothing warehouse, where I received a cap, overcoat and duffel bag, and from there to Marina. When she saw me, she shrieked, "Are you leaving already?" Her pale, thin face was covered with a light, as if waxy petite Unable to find the right words, I nod. Approaching closely, Marina wished, "Well, have a happy journey." "Right, please." She tries to smile, and from her big blue eyes slowly roll two transparent tears. See the feelings of pity and gratitude for the sweet little girl overflow my heart. In a burst of tenderness, I suddenly hug her by the shoulders and, kissing her, assure her fervent. "I will write. I will definitely write, Marina. As soon as I get to the unit." Having snatched my overcoat and bag from Volodya's hands, I quickly go to the exit. On the threshold, I turn around and see my friend staring at me. Marina waved goodbye, and Volodya, firmly clenched in a handshake, palms raised them above his head. That's how they were imprinted in my memory. I managed to persuade the military commandant to send me by the nearest train to Stalingrad, where I had to report to the district headquarters. The last decade of April 1942 in Stalingrad was sunny and warm. It was hot in my overcoat and ear flap. In the commandant's office of the headquarters, I was required to fill out a questionnaire and write an autobiography. Then they took them together with my identity card to some major from the personnel department. Time dragged on unbearably slowly. I was tormented by the agony of hunger. Leaving the hospital, I hastily forgot to write out a food certificate. My legs shook from hunger and weakness. To distract myself from thoughts about food, I plunged my head into reading Red Star, a copy of which was offered to me by an employee of the commandant's office. I carefully study the reports of Sovinform Bureau, starting from 1942. Wow, how many glorious events took place at the front and in the country, while I was lying down in the hospital, I involuntarily exclaimed, flipping through the thick file. The bulletins often mentioned the successful offensive actions of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts, and almost every day, about the crushing blows of the troops of the northwestern, Kalinin and western fronts. The whole fascist army at Demyansk was in a huge cauldron, on which it was only necessary to slam the lid. Most of all, I was pleased with the success of our troops in the Smolensk erection, having estimated the distance, which during the winter overcame the troops of the Kalinin and western fronts. I thought with satisfaction that the fascists were pushed back to the west by almost 200 kilometers. Against the background of the tremendous successes of the Soviet troops advancing in the central direction, the deep but narrow wedge driven by the troops of the southwestern and southern fronts south of Kharkov did not attract my attention. I could not have guessed that, 3 months later, the events that started the spring-summer offensive of the fascist army in the Stalingrad and Caucasus directions would unfold here. Looking through the newspapers, I was first of all interested in the events in the Crimea, but there were almost no reports about the Crimean front, so I decided they have not yet begun to act. Everything is still ahead, and I can be in time for the beginning of the offensive. The overall results of the winter campaign of 1940 and 42 year gave optimistic hopes for the approaching summer. It seemed that the strategic initiative finally rested from the Nazis. There was hope that with the end of the spring thaw the Soviet offensive would resume. Who of us, who had experienced the bitterness of retreat, did not want to be among the advancing troops. Therefore, I was anxiously awaiting a meeting with the personnel officer who would determine my future fate. Having found a large mirror at the closet, I passed by it several times and furtively looked at myself with an evaluating glance, trying to understand whether I looked cheerful enough for a future frontline soldier. It was beginning to get evening when I was finally summoned for a talk. A tired, elderly major asked a few questions to fill in the gaps in the biography I had written, and in conclusion he said, "We're sending you, Lieutenant, to a reserve regiment." "Why to the reserve regiment?" I jumped up, extremely upset by what I had heard. "I ask you, Comrade Major, to send you to the Crimean front, where my 633rd Rifle Regiment is operating." "Sit down, Lieutenant." Major waved his hand irritably. "We can't send you to the front at once. All replenishments are formed in reserve units. In the regiment, where we send you, finishing the formation of a separate artillery and machine gun battalion, you will go as commander of a machine gun company. And now go to the commandant of the headquarters. He will arrange for you to spend the night." The next day I hurry to the headquarters, where I and 3 other officers are handed a general order, which says, "With the receipt of this to go to the city of Dubovka, Stalingrad region at the disposal of the commander of the 10th Reserve Rifle Regiment." The major from the personnel department showed us on the map where to go and advised us to find a hitchhiker. Using his advice, we arrived in the town on the 2nd day. The first boy we met in short pants answered with a mischievous smile when asked where the military were standing. Despair. Come on, I'll show you. And he led us away, introducing us to many subtleties of regimental life. Soon we were convinced that there was nothing surprising in the knowledge of our guide. Most of the commanders were quartered in the town, and their masters, and through them the whole population of the town, were aware of the events. However, the barracks to which the boy led us was only a regimental quarantine for new arrivals, while the regiment had moved to the summer camp. The next day, a short, thin Major Yanin, the commander of the reserve regiment, came to the quarantine and called the newly arrived officers into his office. Senior Lieutenant Fedchenko introduced us and reported that we had all arrived in the regiment for further service. I know. I received an extract from the order of your assignment. You, Senior Lieutenant, Nsi addressed the regiment commander to Fedchenko, appointed deputy commander of the Machine Gun Company Machine Gun Battalion, Lieutenant Altunanim, commander of the Machine Gun Company Training Battalion, Junior Lieutenant Miatl, commander of the Rifle Company of the 3rd Rifle Battalion, and Junior Lieutenant Gamovsky, commander of the platoon of tank fighters. Are you ready to fulfill your official duties? Ready, Comrade Major? My comrades answered in one voice, and I kept silent, stunned by what I heard. After all, in Stalingrad I was announced that I would be appointed commander of a machine gun company of a separate artillery and machine gun battalion being formed for the active army. And you, Lieutenant, are not ready. Major Yanin looks at me questioningly. Are you afraid that for health reasons you won't be able to command the company? It's all right, you'll get better. We'll ask the brigade command to authorize to assign you increased nutrition. No, Comrade Major. I'm finally regaining the power of speech. The personnel department of the district told me that I was assigned to a unit that is being formed for the front, so the training battalion is a complete surprise for me. How could it be? My face, apparently, expressed such a deep grief that the regimental commander patted me encouragingly on the shoulder. Nothing can be done, Lieutenant. The separate marching battalion you mentioned, I have already personally escorted to Stalingrad, and now it is on the road to the front. So you will have to take a machine gun company in the training battalion. After hesitating, he concludes, and you can't go to the front yet as report that you left the hospital too early. Having returned to the table and signed some paper, the major ordered. And now, comrades commanders, get an extract from the order at the regimental headquarters and take units today. The company was at the firing range, got acquainted with the chief of staff of the battalion, Lieutenant Plitman. Before the reserve regiment, he commanded a platoon at the military school. He amazed me by quoting articles from military regulations by heart. In farewell, Plitman supplied me with a pile of various manuals and instructions. I promised to look through them every free minute. It was not difficult to refresh theoretical knowledge. It is more difficult to restore my strength. And otherwise, what kind of a commander of the training unit? I couldn't wait to see if I could do the exercises listed in the physical training manual on sports equipment. At my request, Company Sergeant Baranovsky escorted me to the sports town. Perform the 8th and 9th exercises on the bar. I asked the petty officer. Baranovsky did both exercises quite well. I tried to repeat them, but to no avail. In my head from the effort as if hammers on the anvil are tapping. Instantly I am covered with profuse sweat. Baranovsky, looking at me, sympathetically remarked, "You are very thin, Comrade Lieutenant. You are completely weakened. We should wait with shells until you get stronger." "Nothing, petty officer." Cursing my weakness, I objected to him. "It won't take 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll be able to do all the exercises on the shells properly." "Muscles, Comrade Lieutenant, are not sold at the market. Near who in our company works best on the equipment?" Lieutenant Kachuchenko, without hesitation, answers the petty officer. "Well, exactly in a month we will hold a competition on shells with the participation of platoon commanders, me and you." Baranovsky shakes his head incredulously. Remembering that in the school the most effective incentive to improve the level of combat training has always been the competition, I risk to challenge physically stronger comrades in the expectation that the ego will not allow them to show results worse than they had just released from the hospital commander. The company had not yet returned from the firing range when I was invited to see Combat Temnov. In the tent next to Plitman sat a heavy, broad-shouldered lieutenant in his 30s with a tanned, weathered face. The gaze of his bright eyes was focused and intense. "Comrade Lieutenant, the commander of the machine gun company. Lieutenant Altunin is introduced in connection with the appointment." Combat tiredly rises and extends a wide bony hand. Congratulations on your appointment, Comrade Lieutenant, and I wish you success. Lowering himself on a stool and offering me a seat, Temnov tiredly closes his eyes and rubs his straight fleshy nose with his finger. Tell me about yourself, Lieutenant. When I finished a brief story about studying at the military school, about participation in the battles, the commander made an unexpected conclusion for me. So, you have a good personal training. Mid-level commanders with such training in our regiment is not even 20%. However, experience in the organization of combat training and methodology of training, let's face it, no, as it is not in the vast majority of platoon and company commanders. Consequently, we all need to pay special attention to improve their methodological training. In the company chancellery gathered all the middle command staff of the company. The attention of those present is drawn to a short junior political officer, all he some run, a full face, soft oval shoulders, protruding from under a long for him cotton uniform belly, round like a young potato nose and good-natured, calm blue eyes. Looking in his notebook, the junior political officer read out the results of the firing exercises and shook his head reproachfully. Badly, comrades, oh how badly we still shoot. How many bullets needed at the front we sent today for milk? And most importantly, how many fascists would have been given life if it had happened at the front? Noticing me, the junior political officer interrupts his speech. I say hello to the commanders sitting at the table. They amicably rise and, introducing themselves, call themselves the commander of the platoon of tank fighters, Lieutenant Katushenko, the commander of the 2nd machine gun platoon, Lieutenant Vakirov, the commander of the 1st machine gun platoon, Junior Lieutenant Kuzmishev, Sergeant Gullen, acting commander of the air defense platoon, Lieutenant Sadovnikov. Hello, comrade lieutenant, smiling affably, says the junior political officer. I'm the political officer of the machine gun company Zakharov, and you, if I'm not mistaken, are its new commander. You are not mistaken, comrade junior political officer. My last name is Altunen. It seems that my appearance interrupted the summarizing of today's firing. Yes, they were talking about the sad results of the firearms training. What's the reason? From the conversation with the platoon commanders, it became clear to me that in the training machine gun company, the commander of which I was appointed, 4 platoons. 2 machine gun, 1 tank fighters, which is armed with anti-tank guns, and air defense platoon, equipped with anti-aircraft guns, each of which is composed of 4 or 2 machine guns with a special sight for shooting at aerial targets. Thus I again had to master unfamiliar weapons and their combat use. After dinner I sit for a long time in a depressed mood. At the front I have not once thought about how best to solve a combat task, and when I gave a command I knew that it would be carried out. But in order for commands to be carried out correctly, the soldiers and commanders must be prepared by someone. The quality of training determines the results of the battle. And I realized for the first time that giving commands is easier than teaching how to carry them out. During the war years, many sergeants and even soldiers who learned the ABCs of military science and had the necessary personal qualities became quite good platoon and company commanders. This is explained not only by bravery and ingenuity, but also by the fact that their commands were carried out by trained people. And in order to teach, you need to know and be able to do a lot of things. I was soon convinced of that. In the reserve regiment, I got acquainted with commanders who distinguished themselves in battles, but unfortunately did not pass military school and did not know the method of training. I have to get up earlier than usual, until 6 o'clock in the morning on homemade sports equipment, like a new recruit, train my muscles. The promise to hold in a month of competition on the shells among the commanders does not go out of my head. The first steps are given hard. I decided to do 1 more pull-up every day, so that by June I could do at least 30 pull-ups. The working day began at 6 in the morning and ended at best at 12 at night. Often returning to the dugout, I forced myself to undress, take off my boots and dismantle the bed by a tremendous effort of will. So great was the desire to collapse on the creaking bed without undressing. His whole body whimpered, his legs trembled and hummed with fatigue. The meagre rear rations did not relieve the constant feeling of hunger. I went through a harsh front school, but here in the rear I was physically no easier. Only the consciousness that our work is extremely necessary for the front, for the victory, and the hope of returning to the active army helped to overcome the overwhelming physical load and cold and lack of sleep. and malnutrition. On April 30, the regiment switched to summer dress uniform. The whole day before the command stand down, we made ourselves look exemplary. Tomorrow is May Day. Although we knew that we would have to work 10 hours on the holiday, we were all in high spirits. The holiday flew by in labour and chaos. And yet on May 2, we managed to carve out some time for rest. Most of my comrades, as always in the rare hours of rest, sat down to write letters. I also wrote a long letter home, in which, having described my life in the rear in detail, flooded my little sister with questions about my father, about my relatives, about my fellow villagers, asked her to write in detail how things were going in the collective farm, how they were coping with sowing. I finished the letter home and remembered that I had not fulfilled my promise to send news to the hospital. For a long time I didn't know where to begin this first letter to the girl. Suddenly I remembered her sad eyes, and no longer looking for words. There are so many of them that my hand can barely keep up with. Marina, I wrote. In my heart constantly lived only my mother, father, sister, and brother, and now the brightest corner in it is given to you. I will never forget to whom I owe my second birth. If it hadn't been for your selfless care, I wouldn't have been able to stand up to the wicked only witch with the scythe. All the hard way from the hospital to the new place of service I was accompanied and energized by the tender look of your gentle and deep, like our Baikal. Now I have two favorite sisters, one in my native Steklianka, the other at Lycaea station, and when my turn to beat the hated enemy comes, I will fight with fascists to the last drop of blood for our mothers and for you, our dear and beloved. Only now I have fully realized that all good deeds are driven by love. It inspires to the feat and sacrifice for the fatherland and our loved ones. I will try to prove that my heart is not alien to this life-giving feeling. But for now I have the share again to take up the study myself and to prepare for the battles of junior commanders. There is absolutely no free time, and when, as now, manages to carve out a free minute, in my thoughts I am carried away to my native village and to the Lycaea station. If there is no hope to get to my native Siberian village before the final victory over the enemy, I hope to stop by Lycaea station on my way to the front. This hope, I feel, will help me to live and overcome everything, and maybe you'll be thrown by a happy accident to Stalingrad. That would be great. For now we'll live in hope for a happy accident, and most importantly for victory, which will be our path to happiness. Goodbye. I embrace you with brotherly tenderness. Your faithful friend Alexander. All commanders who arrived in the regiment from the hospitals was assigned enhanced nutrition. Thanks to this I began to feel how every day added strength, but unfortunately, not as quickly as I would like. I realized it during the first march. I braced myself, and yet on the way back, almost at the camp, I stumbled and fell down. I got up with great difficulty. My legs were shaking. Baranovsky ran up to me with 4 strong cadets, ashamed of my weakness. I gritted my teeth and trudged with all my might. Baranovsky, stomping heavily beside me, persuaded me to lie down on a cloak turtle. Don't be shy, comrade lieutenant. Everyone understands that after the hospital you have not yet recovered. Even healthy men can hardly hold on here. In the neighbouring company, the soldiers of Lieutenant Gorshkov were carrying him on their hands from the very beginning of the march. Otherwise he wouldn't have run even half a kilometre. Both his legs were broken. I myself noticed that many of the commanders, weakened by heavy wounds and illnesses, were carried in turn on their hands. However, wanting to interrupt the persistent entreaties of the petty officer, who apparently fears that I will fall again, I deliberately sternly shouted, "Leave me alone. Comrade petty officer, my legs are intact." Noticing how exhausted junior political trooper Zakharov was by the kilometers left behind, I tried to soften my shout with a jerk. "Put Comrade Zakharov down. He looks at the tent coat very enviously." "I don't mind." Zakharov laughs, wiping sweat from his forehead with his cap. "I'm glad that I got to the company location with a shield and not on a shield. In order to avoid a similar embarrassment, I began to make time for training and running. Every day I get to know my comrades closer. I like junior political officer Zakharov very much. Kind and cordial, he knows how to pick up the keys to the hearts of people. For a political officer, it is especially important. His military training is weak. He relies entirely on me for training methods. But he has the ability to see the main link in the tasks we have to solve. And it is not surprising that Zakharov immediately understood my concern about the low results of live firing and put a lot of effort to help me achieve better results. During firearms training, Zakharov was always in the platoons. He could be seen in groups studying the machine gun and practicing firing techniques from it, among the soldiers mastering the skill of shooting from an anti-tank gun. He tries to use every break to talk to the soldiers about the situation at the fronts, about the selfless work of home front workers, about the labor heroism of Komsomol front brigades. The commander of the 1st Machine Gun Platoon, Kuzmichev, before the war worked as a supply clerk at one of the factories. Cheerful, energetic, physically very strong, he is clearly weighed down by the daily, laborious work on training and education of soldiers, and it was difficult for him. At the short-term courses, he did not particularly bother to study and somehow mastered the training program. As I was convinced, he had not studied the weapon well, and he did not fire it steadily enough. Some sergeants from his platoon showed themselves more prepared. This circumstance torments self-loving Kuzmikov. However, he is not trying to hard study to eliminate his lag, ashamed, apparently, to recognize his lack of competence. We have to give him a lot of attention, knowing about his heightened ego. I try more often to address him with requests to help me understand this or that issue. It is pleasant to him and at the same time forces him to dig into the statutes, instructions, to think about how to better organize the lesson, and I am pleased to observe with what pride he enlightens me on some issues in which he himself for the first time was able to understand to the end. But once Kuzmichev in the presence of Zakharov said, "I am not fit to teach others. Send me to the front. There I will show what I can do." Junior Lieutenant Kuzmichev. The political officer's voice suddenly sounded harsh, and kind eyes narrowed. "You are not sent to the front as a punishment. This honor must be earned. Every day, intense, self-sacrificing labor requires great courage and fortitude. It is not yet known where you will do more harm, in the rear or at the front. In the rear, your mistakes can be corrected by a senior commander, but at the front, your subordinates will pay for them in blood. Remember this, Junior Lieutenant. Show more persistence in your training and study yourself in the most serious way. Then you will have the moral right to apply for the front." The political officer's voice sounds harsh. Kuzmichev blushes and then turns pale. Having looked at us offended, he exclaims irritably, "I'm asking for the front, not the head of the canteen." We have a long conversation with the stubborn commander, trying to arouse his interest in learning and educational work. He listens attentively, agrees, expresses his opinion, but, leaving, suddenly asks, "And if my soldiers pass the exams well, will you let me go to the front?" We talked and talked with you, but it all turned out to be in vain. The Politruk claps his hands on his knees in annoyance. With the same persistence as Kuzmichev, sought direction to the front, Lieutenant Katuchenko, and if the first wanted to go there because of inability to train subordinates and pinched ego, the second dreamed in a combat situation to show their knowledge. With Lieutenant Katuchenko, the commander of the platoon of tank fighters, we were the same age. We graduated from the school at the same time. After graduation, he was appointed commander of a rifle platoon of one of the units stationed in Siberia. Therefore, Lieutenant Katuchenko already had some experience in the method of conducting classes. However, tactics and fire training of tank fighters was a new thing for him. One could say that he was teaching his subordinates and learning at the same time. So 2 days after my assumption of command of the company, Katuchenko handed me a report in which he asked to apply for his enrollment in the marching battalion. Zakharov and I tried to prove to the lieutenant that, having a good military training, he will be of great benefit training junior commanders for the active army. "Understand," Zakharov persuaded. "It is necessary for victory. We have old men and invalids in our regiment. They have the cards in their hands. Let them teach, and the youth must fight." "And why do you, Lieutenant, consider me an old man?" I ask mockingly. "After all, we are the same age." "It's not about you, Comrade Lieutenant." Katuchenko is embarrassed for a moment. "There are few young men like you and me in the regiment. Most of them are over 30. Many are over 40 and even over 50. Besides, you've already been to the front, and I haven't yet." So we could not convince Katuchenko. "Leaving," he warned. "I'll still try to get you sent to the front." In my heart, I sympathized with him. In the 20th days of May, for the first time on duty in the unit, and only now I realize how numerous the reserve regiment. There are about 8,000 soldiers and commanders on the boiler allowance. Even the rifle divisions in which I fought did not number so many. And how many different specialists are trained here? In order to maintain a firm order in the unit, you need well-organized internal and guard services. The whole day on my shoulders is the responsibility for carrying out the service as an internal outfit and sentries. Everything is new and unfamiliar to me because I've never had to be on duty before. And again, with gratitude, I remember my mentors who were able to give us, the cadets, an idea of how the duties of the duty officer on duty in the unit, defined by the relevant statutes, are practically carried out. On one of the Sundays, which were also training days, we had an hour before dinner to hold a competition on sports equipment. Sakharov invited Combat Temnov and Nukhstab Plickman to be members of the jury. Combat, having learned about the purpose of the commander's competition, willingly agreed to act as a judge. Daily hard training was not wasted. I'm in a fighting mood. Swing forceration begins with the mandatory exercise. Swing forward and a sharp exit with the whole body on the crossbar. The first does the exercise Baranovsky. Well done, petty officer. Baranovsky replaced at the shell Sergeant Gulen. He performed the exercise a little weaker, but confidently enough. Then Kuzmichev hesitantly approaches the shell. He, like the other participants, is wearing only pants and boots. On the athletic torso of the junior lieutenant roll over the bumps of elastic muscles. From the outside, it seems that now Kuzmichev will make a light jerk, and the bird will fly up on the bar, but he swings unreasonably long and with difficulty, ugly dangling legs, climbs up on the bar. I notice how both members of the jury wrinkle unhappily. Easily performs the exercise Vakurov. If he paid more attention to the clarity of execution of each element, could claim first. It's Katuchenko's turn. His figure is far from athletic, but when he, like an unclenched spring, takes off on the bar, I admire him. Having fixed the swallow, Katushenko, with the grace of a gymnast of high class, makes a jump and ranks in formation. I step to the apparatus. I know that Katuchenko I cannot catch up, but I do my best to get as close as possible to his result. Combat congratulates me on the excellent performance of the exercise, but at the same time with a sly smile announces that the jury still awarded the first place to Katuchenko. I congratulated the lieutenant on the victory and warned that in a month I would try to take revenge. Katuchenko smiled enigmatically. Only a little later I guessed what was behind that smile. Regular live firing, held in late May, showed that the overall efforts in firearms training gave the first positive results. Our company was noted in the regimental order for good shooting from machine guns. One can only dream of such marks in shooting from anti-tank rifles and anti-aircraft guns. We with Zakharov painfully experience failures of tank fighters and anti-aircraft gunners, and almost daily train together with soldiers in shooting at tanks and aircraft. The situation at the front again became tense. If in the middle of May Zakharov with enthusiasm and pleasure emphasized the active actions of the Soviet troops in the Kharkov direction, then in the 20th days of May the reports of the Sovinform Bureau ready calls alarm because of the sudden deterioration of the situation near Kharkov and in the Crimea. When the political officer bitterly reported that our troops had abandoned the Kerch Peninsula, I was worried about the fate of my comrades from the 633rd Regiment. The same day I wrote another letter to Veniamin Soloviev. I wanted to know if he and other comrades were alive. However, I never received a reply. Daily training and good nutrition helps me to get stronger. During regularly repeated marching throws, Petty Officer Baranovsky no longer tries to put me on a trench coach. My spirits are cheered up by pleasant news. A letter from the hospital arrived. Alexander Tevish, dear, wrote Marina, hello, hello, and hello again. Now, when I write this letter midnight, the hospital is remarkably quiet. Today's duty is especially quiet. We have not been bombed yet. Even the seriously wounded are not calling for help. And I, for the umpteenth time, I'm rereading your letter. When it was handed to me, I didn't dare to open it for a long time. I was worried what awaited me. When I read it, I cried. I thought that people cry only with grief, but I had tears and joy mixed up. Thank you for your tender words, for the hope you gave me. How everything has brightened up around me. Even the war doesn't seem so terrible now. An unfamiliar and wonderful feeling took possession of my heart, and I did not know that life is so beautiful with all its troubles and hardships. Maybe this is the mysterious love, about which my older friends buzzed my ears. If so, then I now know that love is a passionate desire to live and fight for happiness, and I will fight for my happiness, for our happiness. Now I'm so strong that no horrors of war will frighten me. I calmly look into the future. and not so long ago the whole world was coloured black for me. I went into the wards filled with the wounded and sick, and it seemed that I would see you on one of the beds. There was a lot of work. If I had a quiet moment, I prepared dressing materials, boiled instruments, but my thoughts were far away. Where is he now? What about him? I had to close my eyes, and you were as if alive in front of me. You were lying on the bed, and I was sitting next to you. Then we were walking in the garden, and I was in a hurry to tell you everything I had not had time to say before our separation. I feel better now. Your letter warms me. I always have it with me. Nothing is dearer to me now than this triangle. It is a part of your soul, Sasha. Can I call you that? In my mind, I have been calling you so for a long time. But now I have written, and I was embarrassed. If you would not be angry. For you, I am only a silly girl. My God, what a fool I am, and an egoist at that. I suddenly wished you were brought to us again, only lightly wounded. Oh, how I would have nursed you back to health. I reread what I had written, and involuntarily ashamed. I'm really selfish. The war continues, bombs are exploding, blood is pouring, our loved ones are dying, the wounded are suffering, and I dream of happiness. But on the other hand, you can't order your heart. And why should I order it, if love helps you to live, makes you strong? I wish that you, Sasha, would help me to stay as strong as I feel now. And then I will endure everything, overcome everything. Know that you are everything to me, brother, sister, father, mother. There is no one dearer. It seems to me that life has tied my fate to yours with such a knot, which I have neither strength nor desire to untie. You write that I have beaten you back from death. Know that I am ready to fight for your life with 1,000 deaths. You're always trying to emphasize that I'm just a child. You are wrong. The girl of 17 takes life much more seriously than a guy of 20, and the damned war has made even children grow up. We're being bombed a lot now. There are rumors about evacuating the hospital. Maybe we should move closer to you. And then I'll go to the front together with you. That would be great. Whatever happens, I believe in our meeting, and I'll live in hope of that meeting. Only you write to me, please. The unknown is more terrible than separation and the most distant distances. Don't forget, please. Waiting. Your Marina. For a long time I look at the uneven lines of the letter, and in front of me again appear blue eyes and 2 transparent tears on her cheeks. When I wrote the letter, I assured myself that I was doing it out of a sense of heartfelt gratitude, fulfilling a promise, and read the answer, and realized that a new, unfamiliar feeling was born in my heart. Under the fresh impression, I immediately wrote a reply, in which I did not spare kind and tender words. A week later, I received good news from the village. My sister told me the good news about my father. He had been wounded, but now he had recovered and was fighting again, and she sent my father my new address. With a smile, I read her story about how, together with her cousin Tanya, she mastered the tractor and combine harvester. It is hard for me to imagine next to the huge machines and unsteady girl figures. My darling, say you, I think, you had to take on your fragile shoulders male cares. July ended successfully. The soldiers' solid knowledge and good practical skills in all sections of the training program, including firearms training, and, having received the rank of junior sergeant or sergeant, went to the marching companies. Believing that now I could ask to be sent to the front, I went to the regiment commissar, Battalion Commissar Kazakov, to whom I reported that I had come for advice as a communist to a communist, good-naturedly grins. I know what advice you have come for. Have you come to ask to be sent to the front? Noticing my embarrassment, he laughs. You are not the first to ask for such advice. I explained that I have already recovered from the consequences of the disease. I feel healthy and able to fight at the front. The commissar's good-natured face grows stern. He paces silently around the room, then stops and, looking intently into my eyes, You are still a young communist, Lieutenant, and I forgive you such a prank. But from now on, get it through your head. A communist should be where he can do the most good. I've been told that communists have one privilege, to always be ahead where it's hardest. And right now, the hardest place is at the front. Weren't you told? Kazakov gently puts his hand on my shoulder. Matt, the first duty of a communist is to give selflessly to the work he's been entrusted with. We are now solving a very important task, preparing personnel for the active army, and we must fulfill our duty. Remember, it is necessary for victory. The commissar said a phrase once said Zakharov to Lieutenant Kachenko. I realized whose words the political officer had repeated and guessed that he, Zakharov, had gone to the commissar with a similar request. Classes with the next set of soldiers began, and the platoon of tank fighters almost lost its commander. The following happened. Lieutenant Katuchenko, on the patronage of Senior Lieutenant Gumarin, was sent to escort the marching company to Stalingrad. It was time to start training with new recruits, and the commander of the platoon of tank fighters had not yet returned. Requests flew. Finally, Katuchenko was brought to the regiment. It turns out that he was removed from the echelon, which marching companies went to the active army. The lieutenant explained his frivolous act by the desire to get to the front as soon as possible. When the political officer and I began to work out the fugitive, he exploded. I can't hold targets when fascists are atrocious in my Poltava region. Katuchenko turned pale, usually laughing and good-natured. He gritted his teeth. When I read in the newspapers what the Germans are doing on our land, my heart sinks with hatred for them, with anxiety for the fate of my father, mother, and little sister. In gloomy reflection, Katuchenko bows his head, absent-mindedly listens to our suggestions. When political officer Zakharov, getting angry, warns him that the command can pass the case of his awol to the military tribunal, the lieutenant sadly waves his hand. Hey, anyway, maybe through the court-martial I'll get to the front sooner. Zakharov and I had to listen to accusations of poor educational work with commanders. The conversation with the regiment Commissar Kazakov left a particularly unpleasant residue. When Zakharov and I came to him, he, without letting us open our mouths, burst into an angry tirade, from which it followed that we were educating deserters. Having poured out his anger, the battalion Commissar Kazakov cast a fiery gaze over us and exclaimed, "Shame, shame, shame." The always good-natured face of junior political officer Zakharov became gloomy. It's a disgrace when people run away from the front. He grudgingly frowned and objected he and Katuchenko was going to the front. He filed several reports asking to be sent there. Zakharov comes close to the commissar, as if wanting to tell him something confidential. I would have deserted to the front myself if I didn't have my party card in my pocket. For a few moments, the commissar looks at Zakharov with surprise, as if he could not believe that these red words had escaped the lips of the quiet, good-natured and disciplined junior political officer, as he knew him to be. Wow, Kazakov waved his hands. I didn't expect such a thing from you, Zakharov. That's no way for a party member to talk like that. The party member has the right to his own wishes. The reserved Zakharov is visibly embarrassed by his involuntary outburst. Only he is obliged to subordinate them to the interests of the cause. That's what I'm doing. Raznostai, which the commissar taught us, ended unexpectedly peacefully. Kazakov gradually softened his voice, and at the end of the conversation frankly admitted that he himself also dreams of being where the fate of the country is now being decided. Since May 1942, the reports of the Sovinform Bureau became more and more alarming. Especially upsetting were the reports about the abandonment of the Kerch Peninsula. After all, this land is watered with my blood, and the failure of the troops of the southwestern and southern fronts in the Kharkov area. In spite of the fierce repulse which the Soviet troops rendered in June and July, the fascist command, throwing all new forces into the heat of battle, managed to advance its armies eastward both in the Voronezh direction and in Donbas. The worsening situation of the troops in the southern section of the Soviet-German front was also evidenced by the intensive evacuation of industrial enterprises and population from these areas. The commanders who accompanied the marching units to Stalingrad told that the railroad junctions were jammed with trains. On the highways there were endless streams of laden cars taking people and valuable goods beyond the Volga. Marina's fate is becoming more and more alarming. Station Likaya was behind the front line. Was the hospital evacuated? This thought does not give me rest, especially since the answer to my second letter I still have not received. In the second half of July, the fighting unfolded in the bend of the Don. The young commanders cherished the hope that the regiment would be moved to the front from day to day. Often sitting up late, they hotly discussed the events at the front. I became a participant of such a conversation. Several platoon and company commanders, as usual, began to evaluate the latest reports of the Sovinform Bureau. Young strategists put forward their own plans for conducting operations and even the war as the argument about how to improve the situation on the southern wing of the Soviet-German front dragged on. Many commanders went to bed. Only the most inveterate strategists, junior lieutenants Vasya Barabanov and Grisha Pedalkin, who had left the military school 3 months ago and naively considered themselves to have mastered all the wisdom of military affairs, and our restless Katushenko continued to defend their views in hoarse voices. I was awakened by a loud exclamation of Vasya Barabanov. And I assert that Pedalkin misjudges Hitler's plans. No, he does not hope to defeat the Soviet troops in open combat. His whole calculation is based on taking us by force. The fascist army is supplied by the whole of Europe and us. That's just it. You, Drum, have not understood either the plans or the strategy of our Supreme High Command. He hid Pedalkin, jumping to his feet and waving his arms. Remember the words of Comrade Stein, he's working for us. The influence on the course of the war of such an incidental factor as surprise is weakening more and more noticeably, and permanent factors are coming into force. Seltin solemnly lists all these factors, and, with a triumphant look at Barabanov, concludes, if Hitler does not succeed in inflicting now, in the summer, a decisive defeat of our troops, his case wrecked. Wrongly you understand Hitler's plan, wrongly. Barabanov waves his hand contemptuously and turns away. You yourself, Barabanov, don't understand a damn thing about strategy, shouts Pedalkin, deeply offended by such an openly expressed underestimation of his ability to think on a strategic scale. And Lieutenant Katushenko looks at the tired faces of the junior lieutenants with an ironic smile. I looked at my watch and could not believe my eyes. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Loud mutual accusations of Barabanov and Pedalkin in military illiteracy wake up all those who have fallen asleep. They lazily rise and go to their places. And in the early morning all participants of the night gathering as if nothing had happened hurry, with their platoons and companies to the training field or firing range. On a hot August morning our company was at the firing range. Suddenly the duty officer signalled gathering of commanders, and when everyone gathered, see comrades, the regimental commander ordered all units to immediately return to camp. Finally came our turn to go to the front. Katushenko couldn't resist. All the way to the camp we are running. I look around the formation with surprise. Not a single lagging behind. All run easily with tense faces. Such I am used to see fighters and commanders only before the battle. In the camp, Combat Temdov read out an unexpected order for us. The regiment was hastily withdrawn to the deep rear. At 16 hours 30 minutes the next day it should start crossing the Volga. Our battalion crossed in the first echelon. The commanders reacted differently to the announced order. Some poured the battalion commander with questions about the order of redeployment, especially weapons and equipment. Others, mostly young people, expressed obvious sadness that their hope to immediately engage in battle with the enemy is not realized. As soon as Combat Temnov declared the meeting over, the commanders broke into groups, slowly dispersing to the units, hotly exchanging impressions. In one of the groups, which was also Katushenko, agreed that in such a formidable hour for Stalingrad ashamed to go beyond the Volga, that all commanders should be asked to go to the front. Katushenko, pulling off his cap and waving it, proposed, brothers, let's appeal to the regiment commander with a request to report to the command about our desire to go to the front. Right, voices of the lieutenant's associates were heard. Let's make a request. Let them send those who want to go to the front. Having learned about these sentiments, the commander and commissar of the regiment gathered the entire middle command staff. Comrades commanders, Major Yanin looked intently at the gathered. I will be brief, we do not have time to talk. From the battalion's received reports, which set out one request, send to the front. I do not have the opportunity to answer each of them, so I announce my decision to everyone. I categorically refuse and ask you to take into account that I will not consider any more reports with requests to be sent to the front. Remember, comrades, that the more difficult the situation at the front is, the more important it is for every commander and political worker to proportion his desires to the iron necessity. Victory is forged not only at the front. Therefore, a true patriot is the one who spares neither strength nor life in the name of fulfilling his civic duty at the post entrusted to him by the motherland. Please take into account, my comrade Major. I suddenly heard a hoarse voice on my right. Company commander of the 1st Battalion, Kovalev. I asked permission to address CNTs, Comrade Kovalev. I understand. In Kovalev's voice there is excitement. Me, that every commander must fulfill his duty at the post entrusted to him by the motherland. But there may be special circumstances. I have a wife and daughter in Stalingrad. Can I leave them and run away across the Volga? No, let me stay here to fight the enemy. You're wrong, Kovalev. The regiment commander is calm but stern. Is it possible to disband all commanders to fight only where their family lives? But, Comrade Major, in the voice of Kovalev, despair. That's it, Comrade Company Commander. Nayan cut him off dryly. Yes, my words haven't reached your consciousness. Come and we'll have a talk. But now we must hurry with the gathering. Turning to Kazakov, he looks at him questioningly. Nodding, the Commissar said, Comrades, I want to draw your attention to the fact that in the most difficult situation that has developed in the Stalingrad direction, when the enemy is rushing to the Volga, our Supreme High Command is withdrawing tens of thousands of soldiers over the Volga. What does this indicate? It's that our Supreme Command confidently controls the events at the front and firmly realizes its strategic plan. At the decisive moment, it will move the reserves that are being prepared in the rear, and you and I must help in the preparation of these reserves. Therefore, no more whining and doubts. All our efforts to redeploy and to resume training as soon as possible. Is the task clear, comrades? Everyone. In that case, take your places, commanded the regimental commander. At the appointed hour, our training battalion began the cross. The units crossed the Volga on boats, ferries, anxiously looking at the cloudless sky. When the boats on which crossed our company approached the middle of the river, suddenly howled siren. And in about 5 minutes, where boats and ferries were just visible, huge fountains rose. Over the river spread loud commands, cries of despair, cries of save me. My attention is riveted to the boat following us, on which the platoons of Kuzmichev and Katushenko are crossing. Bombs exploded on both sides of the boat, caused panic, fighters fleeing from side to side. The light boat was lurching terribly and lay one or the other side on the water. It seemed that the boat would inevitably capsize, but at that moment the fascist airplane suddenly started to smoke, and leaving behind a black plume, rushed to the ground. Seeing this, the soldiers froze in place. A loud explosion, coming from where the Nazi plane fell, caused shouts of joy. Planes with spider swastikas still roared over the heads of the fighters crossing, but they already reacted more calmly to the fountains rising nearby. From the boat survived, it seemed, from imminent death, heard the ringing voice of Katushenko singing about the indomitable will of Russian sailors. Up you go, comrades, all to your places. The last parade is coming. The words of the refrain, picked up by dozens of voices, drowned out the whistle of falling bombs. Our proud Variag won't surrender to the enemy. No one wants mercy. The song was picked up by the nearest boats, ferries, rafts, and under its stirring words the units, one after another, safely docked to the shore. The sun was halfway to the zenith when the last wagons of the regimental staff crossed the Volga, took refuge in the wide gullies on the left bank. Toward evening, Combat Temnov gathered platoon commanders and announced that in 2 hours the regiment was coming. Heavy weapons and company property had to be handed over to the battalion's cart. Since we were to have a long walk, the commander strictly warned the commanders about the need to prepare the soldiers accordingly. The warning was not unreasonable. I involuntarily remembered the retreat of our battalion to Smolensk, when I, to my shame, was among those who almost dropped out of the line because I did not take care of my legs. On the road, the slightest scuffing of the feet can put you out of commission. Evening came, but it didn't get any cooler. The temperature is about 30 degrees. We pour sweat, which mixes with road dust, on the sides of the scorched steppe with scanty and unknown to me vegetation. Some wild withered cereals, wormwood, bushes of stiff grass, which one of the fighters called solyanka. I am surprised that with such stunted vegetation in the Caspian lowland cattle breeding is developed. The steppe, which seemed lifeless, comes alive in the evening. Lizards flicker under our feet, marmosets gather in groups on the side, and there are a lot of insects. At dawn, a winding ribbon of the river shone in the distance to our right. Brothers, I heard someone's joyful and excited voice. Look, we have returned to the Mother Volga again. You've got your finger in the sky. Someone cut him off. Have you forgotten the Volga, Stepan? It's a brook. What kind of river is it? It's not the Volga. Ask your commanders. They're supposed to know everything. That's Comrade Lieutenant. What kind of river is this? He didn't have a map. However, the lieutenant did not like to admit his ignorance. After a moment's hesitation, he answered mockingly, You will know everything, Vodolaskin. You will soon grow old. If necessary, everything will be told to you. where we are now and where we are going, and what river it is. Unnoticeably lagging behind the platoon, Katuchenko turns up next to me, and as if by any chance, do you know Comrade Komrati? What is that shabby little river on our right? For a few moments I walk in silence, remembering the names of the rivers flowing into the Volga between Stalingrad and Astrakhan. Suddenly the name Volgo-Aktuba floodplain comes to mind. Agachaba, the left branch of the Volga, Comrade Katushenko. I answer in passing, but in my heart I rejoice that my memory did not fail me. In the lower reaches of the Volga on the left bank, it has no tributaries. What grade did you get in geography? A rod, why? That's why we couldn't answer the fighter's question. I couldn't resist not to prick the arrogant lieutenant. When more and more often there were gourds, vegetable gardens and orchards, among which it was possible to camouflage the units, the regiment was stopped for a day's rest. At 18 o'clock the regiment again stretched out in a marching column and continued southward. They had barely begun moving when a red rocket flew up into the air and the word air was shouted through the column. The units quickly dispersed. Looking at the soldiers, I can easily determine which of them has already been under bombardment. They are running leisurely, calmly looking at the sky. And those to whom the bombing is still new are running, ducking low to the ground, as if bullets are whistling above their heads. 5 Nazi bombers, accompanied by fighters, are flying over us. Lumps of petrified earth and clouds of dust rise into the sky. Having made 2 runs, the bombers turn to the west, and the fighters engage in battle with 3 appeared MiGs. Barely the regiment beats. Barely the regiment stretched into a marching column, there were 5 Nazi bombers. On the 3rd day I went on duty in the regiment. The assistant on duty is a skinny, very small junior Lieutenant Trushin. Everything in him is miniature. A round wrinkled face, a small upturned nose, small inquisitive eyes. Shortly before the start of the march, I was going to go around the location of the regiment to check the readiness of the marching guard to go out. Having given the necessary instructions to my assistant, I jumped on the step of the truck, but Trushin touched me by the sleeve. Looking around, he whispers in my ear with a mysterious look. In 2 hours we will be bombed too. Does the Germans tell you that? I ask him mockingly. No, I answers without a shadow of offence. I guessed it myself. Yesterday I reported my suspicions to the commissar, but he, busy with some important business, promised to sort it out later. I wanted to inform the regimental commander, but there was no proof. What evidence? I continue to be perplexed. You see, what's the story? Trushin pulls off his cap and furiously scratches the back of his head. In July I was travelling to the regiment on a hitchhiker. 6 of us in the back, 2 men and 4 women. My attention was attracted by a blonde girl of about 25, whose rare beauty was not spoiled even by a simple dusty kerchief that tied her lush wavy hair the colour of ripe wheat. He could hardly bring himself to look around, but he listened attentively to the conversation that the women were lazily carrying on. They, it turned out, lived in the town where we were going, and the blonde lived in Stalingrad. Her husband was mobilized to the army. It became difficult to live in Stalingrad, and she decided to move to some small town. On the advice of acquaintances, she chose Dubovka, but she didn't know how to find a place to live. Hearty fellow travellers began to invite the blonde to live with them. There is enough space, they say, because they all live in their own homes. So I was not surprised when a week ago I saw a blonde in our regimental bakery. I was alarmed by something. The head of the bakery said that she had been evacuated from Gomel. Trushin looked at me expressively. Do you remember in conversation with fellow travellers, she explained her move to Dubovka in a different way? I reported these suspicions to the battalion commissar. He promised to check, and then the regiment suddenly left the place. The junior lieutenant was silent. Intrigued by his message, I asked, what is the connection between your story and the assumption about the imminent German raid? The most direct, Trushin revived. When the regiment left the camp, I began to hang around the bakery at every opportunity. Last night I saw her coming back from the river with a suitcase. Her hair was wet. She seemed to be bathing. Maybe she did go for a bath because it's so hot. What if she has a transmitter? Trushin asked in a whisper. Is it difficult to report the coordinates of the day camp and the time of the performance? After all, the Nazi bombers come when the regiment is lined up in column. It's as if the Germans know in advance when we're going to perform. Now judge for yourself. If in 2 hours we'll be bombed, then my suspicions are justified. I was stunned. At first glance, everything seemed absurd. However, the coincidence of the time of the arrival of the planes and the beginning of the movement of the regiment was alarming. Overcoming the fear of causing ridicule, I suggest Trushin immediately go to the regiment command. Major Yanin we found in a small army tent, camouflaged in the coastal shrubbery. After listening, he conferred with a tall, gaunt senior lieutenant, unfamiliar to me, and made an unexpected decision to delay the performance of the regiment from the area of the day camp for an hour. If the planes arrive, he told the senior lieutenant, you act according to your plan. The senior lieutenant left Trushin to himself, and I went to the units to convey the order of the regiment commander to carefully camouflage, impatiently looking at the clock, at the cloudless sky. Finally, the hour hand passed the number 6, and there is not a single airplane in the sky. I think with shame that I helped Trushin mislead the regiment commander. What do I, Pinkertons, mentally scold myself for gullibility, and suddenly my strained hearing caught the distant rumble of airplanes. Are they really flying? I look at the dial. 18 hours and 25 minutes. The rumbling grows, and in the white sky the silhouettes of airplanes become clearer and clearer. As yesterday, in the lower tier are bombers, only this time there are 4 of them, and above them, like skittish pigeons, 3 fast fighters. Having camouflaged the semi-truck, I cautiously look at the bombers. They are slowly passing along the road like kites looking for prey. However, for some reason they do not drop bombs. They do not see the marching column. Flashes a hunch. They are looking for it. Look for it, you bastards. I gloat. Airplanes fly south, return back. Not finding the column, they drop bombs on the road and damage only the sheep flock. And the regimental bakery by this time was cordoned off by the company on duty. When I arrived there, all the bakery workers were standing in a line. Among the women I immediately recognize a blonde beauty. She is calm, in her hands a small bundle. Trushin, seeing me, whispered. She twirled. Are all the employees of the bakery present here? Major Yanin asked the bewildered head of the bakery. Yes, Comrade Major. Did everyone take their personal belongings? That's right, all of them. Give me the list of personnel. The regimental commander silently handed the list to a gaunt senior lieutenant. He began to read out the surname and, hearing the answering eye, looks carefully at the one who responded. Finally, the list is checked and the blonde has not yet responded. Are there present here outsiders? Asked the regiment commander. My fault, Comrade Major. The voice of the head of the bakery trembled. In Dubovka, the wife of a Red Army captain evacuated from Gomel asked to join us. I did not have time to report to you to formalize the order. I forbade you to hire. Yui flared up Yanin. My fault, Comrade Major. I thought to help the wife of the commander. Having examined the personal belongings, the gaunt senior lieutenant asked, Are these all personal belongings? All of them, confirmed the bakery workers. The senior lieutenant looks at the commander of the company on duty, at whose signal 2 soldiers bring out a plywood box and a small shabby suitcase upholstered in black sodden leather. And whose are these? Oh, my goodness mine, shouts a dense young woman, pointing at the plywood box. I wanted to send a parcel to my mother, but I didn't have time. No, what's in the box? Sugar, salt and soap, a little bit of everything. The woman answers without hesitation. At the sign of the senior lieutenant, the soldier rips off the lid of the box with a bayonet and pulls out the items listed by the woman, arranged in white pillowcases. And to whom does this suitcase belong? The senior lieutenant's question remains unanswered. The silence drags on. The women look at each other. The blonde woman stares blankly at the senior lieutenant. Victoria Petrovna. Suddenly comes the voice of the bakery manager, in which one can hear surprise. After all, this is your suitcase. You said that it contains all the property that you managed to seize from Gomez. You're mistaken, Comrade Lieutenant. The blonde replies nonchalantly. I've never had such a shabby suitcase. It belongs in a landfill. The head of the bakery is confused. The commander of the company on duty hands the suitcase to the senior lieutenant and helps him open it. Everyone is surprised to see the equipment built into the suitcase, on top of which are headphones. Radio. One of the commanders couldn't stand it. What is it, comrades? The head of the bakery, with quivering lips, slowly goes to the opened suitcase and looks at it with horror. "What is it, brothers?" As the senior lieutenant quickly approaches the blonde woman and silently shows her where to go. She stares at him with a fixed, unseeing gaze and walks unsteadily ahead of the senior lieutenant. Having taken away the bakery manager's revolver, Yanin orders him to be taken into custody. Seeing the shining truncheon, the regimental commander beckoned him to him. "Well done, Comrade Junior Lieutenant. On behalf of the service, I'm thanking you. I serve the Soviet Union." No more fascist planes disturbed the regiment. Soon it was safely settled in the camps. Immediately resumed training. The soldiers are engaged in some kind of fierce obsession. Every day their firing skill grows. Our commander regularly holds competitions for commanders in shooting from personal weapons, and when someone unsuccessfully performs an exercise, Temov mockingly reproaches, "Yes, how can you send such a commander to the front?" The day, as a rule, begins with a political briefing, which is conducted by political officer Zakharov. Everyone is avidly interested in the events at the front, especially in Stalingrad, where the fascists managed to break through to the Volga, cut off the 62nd Army from the main forces of the front, and to fight on the nearest approaches to the city. Zakharov skillfully illustrates the story with exciting examples of heroism of Soviet soldiers, and once ended a politinformatsia verse. "There is a cliff on the Volga. It is armored, that from our courage is forged. There is no one in the world who would not know it. We call it Stalingrad. There are shells rumbling. There are fires smoking. The mother Volga is all darkened. But Stalingrad is standing, and the heroes are standing for the great just cause." In the second half of September, it became known that the Nazi divisions broke into Stalingrad, that there are fierce street battles. Fascist air raids on the location of spare parts became more frequent. This forced the command to move the reserve units to a quieter area. On September 30, the order to relocate was announced. The following evening, the battalion was loaded into the railroad train. The loading was ordered by a new commander, Senior Lieutenant Orlov, who replaced the seriously ill Lieutenant Temnov. The new commander does not look like a calm, balanced Temnov. He is impetuous and harsh in dealing with his subordinates. Noticing disorder, loudly indignant, colouring speech, strong words. On October 11, our echelon skipped Boguslan and stopped at a small station. After the dry sunny days near Astrakhan, the drenching dampness of autumn seemed especially unpleasant to us. Having organised ourselves into a column, we moved along the soaked road to our new place of residence. A fine cold rain was drizzling incessantly. Overcoat, like a sponge, absorbs the dampness. Cotton cap lies on my head with a soaked pancake. Lively with the hope to dry ourselves, we enter the earthen city, along the streets of which long, spacious dugouts, equipped with bunk beds, are lined up in rows. The quartermasters, headed by Nikita Flagontovich Yakushin, an old artilleryman I liked, quickly divide up the units. We begin to master the dugouts allotted to the machine gun company. At night, when everyone went to bed, sat down for letters. I couldn't wait to know if everything was all right at home, if my father was alive. I also wrote to the main sanitary department of the Red Army. He persuasively asked to inform about the fate of the nurse Marina Dmitrieva and the new address of the hospital, if he had time to evacuate from Lykoi station. In the camp, the days were so filled with busy classes, hikes and various household chores that the commanders and soldiers had only the hours reserved for sleep. Our labours were not wansk. In a short time, the regiment prepared and sent to the front several marching units. The publication of the Infantry Combat Regulations was the beginning of the wide introduction of new tactical principles in the practice of combat training. Politruk Zakharov became the most active propagandist of the statute. He was so successful that he was already expertly giving advice to platoon commanders on improving training methods. And one evening he suddenly said, "You know, Alexander, I want to ask for a favour. Support my petition to transfer me to a command position, even for starters, even as a machine gun platoon commander." Noticing the surprised look, he added, "I want to command a unit in battle myself." "Well, Ivan Dmitrievich, you surprised me." I exclaimed, waving my hands. "Why not? Nowadays there is a huge loss of middle-ranking commanders, and I have already learned something. Medical workers, Ivan Dmitrievich, are as necessary as commanders." "I didn't realize, Alexander, that you were such a conservative." Zakharov got angry, and 3 days later he came running to the firing range and looking for me, said, "I was right. Alexander Terentievich accusing you of conservatism. What is my conservatism? I was surprised. And in the fact that I did not want to support the petition to transfer me to a command position. Having told about the abolition of the Institute of Commissars and Political Officers, about the decision to strengthen the command staff at the expense of the most militarily prepared political workers, Zakharov asked triumphant, "Will you support my candidacy now?" "I won't." "Why not?" In the voice of Zakharov heard resentment. "Well, I don't want to part." "Don't be selfish, Alexander." A slight smile slid across his lips. "You're a party man. This obliges you to respond warmly to all the decisions of the party." "All right, I'll respond." I hastened to calm him down. "I'll vote with both hands for your appointment as company commander instead of me, if you, of course, support my petition to be sent to the front." "No, except for jokes." Zakharov got excited. "Let me be sent to a short-term course." In the evening in the company office we sit for a long time over reports. Then together we go to the commander and give him our compositions. Zakharov still holds daily short polite informations. The soldiers go to them with joy. At Stalingrad, the Soviet troops' repulse to the advancing fascist armies is becoming more and more noticeable. On November 20, the morning Politinformatsia, which began with the message that the Soviet troops at Stalingrad went on a decisive counter-offensive, suddenly turned into a spontaneous rally. All present met the message with a thunderous hurrah. I have never seen my comrades so happy. It was as if they had become younger. They had lost their fatigue. Their eyes were sparkling. They had been waiting for this hour. And all the following days we had a truly festive mood. And on November 24, there was a regimental rally on the completion of the encirclement of the 300,000 Stalingrad group of Germans. This had never happened before, not even in the Battle of Moscow. Soldiers and commanders seemed intoxicated with joy. They shouted and hugged, proclaimed greetings to the great party of Lenin, the Red Army, the supreme commander-in-chief of the Soviet Army. On one of the frosty December days in the location of the training battalion appeared Major Yanin, and unfamiliar to us young fussy lieutenant colonel, with patches indicating 2 heavy wounds. Orlov, who ran up to Yanin, had no time to open his mouth as he pointed at the lieutenant colonel. "Report to Comrade Lieutenant Colonel. Now he is your commander." When Orlov reported, the lieutenant colonel loudly asked, "Have you been to the front?" "No, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel." "No? How do you teach your subordinates to fight if you have not smelled gunpowder yourself?" "According to the regulations and instructions of the Red Army," Orlov replied with resentment in his voice. "Commander is now not in us. The statutes and instructions were written before the war, so it is necessary to be guided by the provisions of the statutes, taking into account combat experience." "Send me to the front. I'll gain experience. I'm not here by my own will." The expression of resentment did not leave Orlov's face. "At the first opportunity to second," coldly said Lieutenant Colonel. The new commander walked around the battalion for a long time, and criticizing Orlov for any omission. "You're all lazy here, in the rear fat year." "That's right, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel." Yanin suddenly laughed, as fat as Cachet the Immortal. He looked ironically at Orlov, who had dried up like a wobble. The lieutenant colonel looked at his predecessor unhappily, but kept silent. When the new commander left for another battalion, Orlov quietly asked one of the commanders, "What is the surname of the new commander?" "Nikontran Saidyan." "Sir Contra," thoughtfully, as if to himself, repeated Orlov. There was laughter. Orlov looked at the commanders in surprise and, having guessed the reason for their laughter, smiled. From that day on, the name of the new commander was called without the last letter. Soon Lieutenant Colonel Contran began to realize his intention to renew the command staff. The first to leave the Chief of Staff, Captain Smirnov, he was followed by the Deputy Commander of the regiment, a 30-year-old cadre captain, a very experienced methodologist, to whom the commanders of units could turn on matters of training at any time of day. Every day one or the other commander was relieved of his post, and one day we found out that our combat Orlov gave up the case. I asked Orlov to allow me to appeal to the regiment commander. "You want to ask for him?" "Urgent defending to the front, and I'm asking you to intercede." Ask. We generously allows Orlov. "Yes, but to intercede, I'm sorry. I cannot. I'm The thought of the upcoming meeting with the regiment commander is not out of my head. I try to cheer myself up. I think, maybe I'll be lucky. Since he so easily parted with more experienced commanders, he will help me. All day I cannot meet with Lieutenant Colonel Contran. It's impossible to catch him on the spot. Only at 12 o'clock in the morning I was able to appear before his formidable eyes. After giving me a displeased look, he asked, "What happened, Lieutenant?" "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, I ask you very much to intercede to send me to the front. I tried to earn this right." "Were you in the battles?" "I haven't participated since January of 1940. "And before January 42nd? "Well, I commanded a company for a while." "I commanded a company." The lieutenant colonel thoughtfully smoothed deep wrinkles on his forehead. "So he saw what modern combat is, and most of the commanders in the regiment didn't. So how am I going to let you go? I'll let them go to the front first, and then people like you. In the meantime, go to work and don't move, so I won't see you again." Having heard my report on the results of the meeting with the regiment commander, Zakharov chuckled. "Well and right. Is it really necessary to send to the front commanders who have already been in battle? If most of us have not been there yet, now it's our turn, my friend. He's a clever commander even though he's a Contra." 2 days later I found Zakharov with a duffel bag in his hands. Having shaken out its contents, he was sorting out his modest possessions. "Where are you going, Ivan Dmitrievich?" "And we, my friend, are going out into the world. Our Contra said so to me today when I came to get an answer to my report with a request to be sent to the front or to command courses." "Well done," he said. "Junior political officer, you're going out to the people. All must go through the crucible of war." "And so, you know," he said the word crucible with relish. He felt so strongly about my heroic decision that he came up and shook my hand. I have the impression that if he had been given the will, he would have sent our whole regiment to the crucible tomorrow. The next morning we warmly saw off Zakharov, who was going to a short-term command course, and Katushenko. He was leaving with a marching battalion to the front. Katushenko shines, shakes firmly, responds to good wishes and vows to assure. "Be calm. Either your chest in crosses or your head in the bushes, but we will reckon with the Krauts for everything." In place of Lieutenant Katushenko arrived Junior Lieutenant Vanin. He limped noticeably, recommending him Battalion Commander Suchalin, who replaced Orlov, proud on his personal account 4 tanks hit. It turned out that Vanin commanded a platoon of anti-tank guns. More than once he had to enter into single combat with tanks and came out victorious. At the end of August, southwest of Stalingrad, Vanin's platoon was attacked by 9 tanks. 5 of them were shot down. Chandin did not manage to see the end of the unequal fight. After the battle, he was found in a half-filled trench and taken to a medical unit. In the hospital, Vanin long stitched together. Several operations he underwent before he got back on his feet. "Perhaps our company will have to carry the commander in his arms during the march through," I thought, looking at the junior lieutenant. And the soldiers, having learned what a combat commander they had, were ready to really carry him in their arms. Left Zakharov replaced junior political officer Yakovlev, a quiet, small-sized man whose face never left a kind smile. He had also just been discharged from the hospital. Looking at this outwardly unremarkable man, it was hard to believe that he personally hit 2 Nazi tanks with anti-tank grenades. The Order of the Red Banner on his narrow, bony chest testified to that. What an amazing burst of strength was noted in all soldiers and commanders on the eve of 1943. And 16-hour classes and strenuous marches in full combat gear, and the cold weather in the Urals helped to bear the good news from the front. It was pleasant to realize that our hard work was not wasted. In the regiment and in our company, there were letters from the front in which fighters told about their successes. After all, they conveyed to us the breath of real combat life.